This is Mission Control Houston. Good morning. Today is Sunday, July 15th, 2018. We're live here inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room, awaiting the release of the Cygnus cargo vehicle for the Northrop Grumman CRS-9 mission. You can see the Cygnus currently poised in its release position at the end of the station's robotic arm, sitting just over 15 meters away from the International Space Station. Space station itself flying 256 statute miles over the North Pacific just south of the Gulf of Alaska, about to cross over the border of the United States, the western border of Washington right now. Inside is over 6,600 pounds, or just over 2 tons, of trash. Volumetrically, the vehicle itself is pretty full. We're looking at a release time right now on track for 7:35 a.m. Central Time release. Cygnus was uninstalled earlier this morning, just around 5:20 a.m. Central Time, and maneuvered by ground controllers into its release position just 15 meters away from the station. In the cupola workstation right now is ESA astronaut, European Space Agency astronaut, Alexander Gerst. He's being backed up right now by Serena Anand Chancellor. Currently in the cupola workstation on board the International Space Station, it'll be Gerst that sends the command for release, and they'll be monitoring the vehicle from the vantage point of the station as it says farewell for after its 52-day stay aboard the orbiting complex. Station's still in an orbital nighttime. You can see the sun from an orbital sunrise. It'll start to get brighter right before we hit right now. Now back inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room here in Houston, Texas at the Johnson Space Center. Currently, the team is about to conduct a go, no-go poll, the final step before it's ready for release, as the window begins to.
Copy release window from 12:20 GMT to 13:07 GMT, and we are proceeding with step 1.5.
Good readback on the window. Understand you're in step 1.5.
That was Capcom Cindy Kester here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room. You were hearing Serena Anand Chancellor on those loops, verifying the commands. Seems like everything is go. They're about to begin their window to actually signify the available time that they have to release the vehicle today. That window opens at 7:20 a.m. Central Time, giving them about 15 minutes before everything is set, and they actually send the command for release. Again, we are currently scheduled on time for that 7:35 a.m. Central Time release. Serena Anand Chancellor looking at this view right now. This is the Cuckoo workstation. Gives them telemetry of the vehicle. Of course, in the cupola, they have a very nice view of Cygnus poised just outside of the cupola workstation from the windows, but this view gives them the telemetry. At the bottom right, you can see that VV to ISS number. That's 15 meters, currently poised away from the space station. Range rate is 0. Once it's released, you'll see that rate go up just a bit, and it'll move faster away from the space station.
Copy, thanks. Understand you're rebooting the SSC.
So the astronaut's currently going through the procedures to get the vehicle ready for release in Virginia today. Of course, we're in the middle of joint operations right now to begin the release. We got space station flight controllers monitoring the space station systems, and the good folks over at Dulles monitoring the Cygnus vehicle. Once it's released today, there'll be a couple milestones as it drifts away from the space station, first crossing the keep out sphere, and then the approach ellipsoid. These are markers that are sort of invisible lines around the space station that are monitored by the flight control teams here and in Dulles. Once it crosses that approach ellipsoid, just about a kilometer away from the space station, that'll end joint operations for today, and we'll wrap up our coverage as the Cygnus vehicle is handed over, the responsibility for the vehicle is handed over to the Northrop Grumman flight controllers in Virginia. Once the vehicle crosses that sphere and the NASA flight controllers are hands-off for the rest of the operations, that is not the end of the mission for Cygnus. It'll still remain in orbit for about 2 weeks. Immediately after crossing the approach ellipsoid, the Dulles flight controllers will take over to move the Cygnus vehicle from 1 kilometer away to about 45 kilometers away. In that position, it'll be behind and above the International Space Station in a good distance away from the station, safely away, to deploy a series of CubeSats. There'll be 6 CubeSats deployed, 4 Lemur satellites and 2 AeroCubes that will be deployed from the externally mounted NanoRacks CubeSat deployer. From this view, you can sort of make it out. You can see the ultraflex solar arrays, the gold-looking circular objects that provide power to the vehicle. Behind it and at the bottom, you can just make out a white object that is the deployer. They'll be deployed 2 at a time in 3 separate increments, several hours away from each other, and that'll happen later today and a little bit into the course of tomorrow. Deployment of those satellites will not be covered on NASA TV.
We copy all.
Just about 12 minutes from the planned release of the Cygnus vehicle today. Of course, this is the 52 days aboard the International Space Station after its launch 2 months ago. Node 1 Unity module on the Earth-facing port ever since. 52 days later, now currently in its release position, about to complete its journey to the International Space Station, providing scientific experiments that the crew have been working on since and will continue to work on through the rest of their increment. Cygnus, not the only vehicle aboard. You can see just there in this view the SpaceX Dragon on its 15th cargo resupply mission, currently docked to the Harmony module at the forward end of the space station, also on the Earth-facing port. Just under a week ago, a Progress vehicle carrying more supplies to the station arrived just about 6 days ago.
Houston Station on 2, Cygnus configuration checks complete. Crew is ready for release and departure.
Houston copies. Stand by for release.
Sorry, say again, Cindy?
Serena, I originally told you to stand by for release. How I can now give you the go for Cygnus release on time at 12.
We are go for an on-time Cygnus release at 12:35. Steps 2 through 4, 1.320. Window closes at 13:07.
Good readback.
So again, that was Serena Anand Chancellor aboard the International Space Station talking to the Capcom Cindy Kester here in the room, confirming that the Cygnus is indeed go for release on time, 7:35 a.m. Central Time. They have the go to release a little bit early, but we're still looking at that on-time marker. Of course, they just read off that there is still a sort of a just over 30-minute window, just in case they needed a little bit extra time, but everything's so far looking good for that on-time release.
Step 2, the attitude control steps all the way up to the trigger.
Checking.
International Space Station is currently 254 statute miles over the continental United States, just about to head over New Orleans into the Gulf of Mexico. Some final confirmation from Serena Aunen Chancellor as she and Alexander Gerst, currently at the controls of the space station's robotic arm, waiting for that release on time at 7:35, going through their final checks. Again, 52 days on orbit, the International Space Station, delivering 7,400 pounds of supplies and scientific experiments to the International Space Station. Cygnus also achieved a milestone. The Northrop Grumman vehicle achieved the testing of the capability for reboosting the International Space Station on July 10th last week. Cygnus cargo ship fired its engines for about 50 seconds, raising the altitude of the space station to an average of 295 feet.
Station Houston on 2 for Serena. You are go to execute step 2 up to the trigger. You are no go for trigger.
Copy. We'll execute the steps in step 2 up to trigger, no go for trigger.
That's a good readback, and we're go for the trigger on time.
Copy. Go for trigger on time.
Capcom Cindy Kester confirming to Serena Aunen Chancellor, currently backing up Alexander Gerst, who's at the controls of the station's robotic arm for release of the Cygnus. That step 2 is the release sequence. A series of commands have to be set. She's going to stop right before that trigger command, waiting for the on-time release of 7:35 a.m. Central Time. Just 3 minutes away from release, the vehicle, Northrop Grumman CRS-9 vehicle is named after the J.R. Thompson. 52 days in orbit and 2 minutes away from release. Cygnus currently poised for an on-time release at 7:35 today. Now just 1 minute away from release, everything still looking good for that on-time release today.
And Houston Station, we are ready for trigger at 12:35.
Houston copies.
Series of commands right now. The snares are open and they're extending the carriage of the latching end effector to finally release the Cygnus vehicle today. Starting to see the separation of the vehicle from this Canada Arm 2. And at 7:37 a.m. today over southeast Colombia, 253 statute miles over the Earth, the Northrop Grumman Cygnus vehicle on its CRS-9 mission has been released from the International Space Station. Confirm separation. You can see the arm backing away as well. Confirmation that the vehicle is steady right now. It's cleared 4.5 meters away from the station's robotic arm. Still poised just under 15 meters away from the station. Standing by for the departure burn to start moving away from the space station. Station's robotic arm is held 4 meters away. The departure burn has been executed. You'll start seeing the Cygnus start moving away from the space station. Confirmation from the crew that that burn has been commanded. Departure burn is underway. The Cygnus vehicle is currently accelerating away from the station.
Station Houston on 2. Cygnus departure burn is in progress. Continue to monitor the departure steps 2 and 3 in 1.602.
Copy. We'll continue to monitor step 2 and 3, 1.602.
Good readback.
With a good view, the astronauts from the cupola workstation will be able to monitor the Cygnus as it drifts away from the space station. They'll continue to monitor it as it crosses the keep-out sphere 200 meters away and the approach ellipsoid just about a kilometer away. Still about 2 minutes left in the burn. We're seeing a rate of about just over half a meter per second and increasing, now 0.6 meters per second. Cygnus vehicle now about to cross 40 meters away from the station. About halfway through the departure burn, Cygnus continuing to accelerate, everything looking nominal so far. Station and Cygnus are 254 statute miles above the Earth, just crossing over Brazil right now. Everything looking nominal so far after a release time at 7:37 a.m. Central Time. Everything's still looking good. Cygnus crossing over 150 meters away from the space station.
Houston copies.
Confirmation that the departure burn is complete. Cygnus holding at just about 1.4 meters per second.
Step 5 in 1.320.
Stand by.
Serena Anand Chancellor and Alexander Gerst continuing to monitor the Cygnus as it continues to move away from the space station. Across the keep-out sphere 200 meters away, 225 meters, and continuing to accelerate out.
Cygnus departure burn is complete. Safe SSRMS per step 5 in 1.320.
Copy. Putting safety in place. Station on 2, SSRMS is safe, and that completes 1.320.
We see the same. Thank you.
Cygnus 300 meters away from the space station, well out of the keep-out sphere, holding at a rate of just over 1.4 meters per second after the successful completion of the departure burn. That single burn should carry it out of the keep-out sphere and the approach ellipsoid. Once it crosses over the approach ellipsoid just about a kilometer away, it'll cease joint operations between NASA flight control teams here in Houston and flight control teams at Northrop Grumman over in Dulles.
Station Houston on 2, Cygnus has exited the 200-meter keep-out sphere.
We copy.
Good reads from Serena Anand Chancellor up on the station and Cindy Kester, Capcom here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Cygnus is confirmed beyond the 200-meter keep-out sphere, actually now 450 meters away and continuing to move away from the space station at a rate of just over 1.4 meters per second.